The family dinner looked picture perfect from the outside. Golden roasted chicken, a warm dining room in the suburbs, and two beautiful children. But the silence was deafening, broken only by the clinking of silverware and the way his wife, Meredith, hurriedly flipped her phone screen down the moment he entered the room. He caught the look his 10-year-old son gave him, not one of love, but of rehearsed suspicion, a seed planted long before he walked through the door. There are secrets that don't just break marriages, they rewrite history for the innocent bystanders. If you want to uncover the painful truth hidden behind these closed doors, stay with me as we unravel the lies. The rain in Ohio didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime on the highway stickier. Caleb Miller downshifted, the gears of his 18-wheeler groaning in protest as he navigated the off-ramp toward the suburbs. The air brakes hissed, a heavy sigh that matched the one trapped in his own chest. He had been gone for 14 days. 14 days of sleeping in truck stops, eating diner grease, and staring at the white lines of the interstate until they burned into his retinas. He pulled the rig into the designated lot at the depot, the smell of diesel and wet asphalt filling his nose as he climbed down. His knees popped. He was 38, but his joints felt 50. He grabbed his duffel bag, the canvas worn thin at the corners, and walked to his beat-up Ford pickup parked in the employee lot. The drive to his house in the Whispering Pines subdivision took 20 minutes. He rehearsed the entry in his mind. He would walk in. Meredith would be in the kitchen, maybe making that lasagna he liked. And the kids, Leo and Sarah, would look up from their homework and run to him. It was the fantasy that got him through the lonely nights in Nebraska, in the snowstorms in Wyoming. He pulled into the driveway. The house looked pristine. The lawn was manicured. The shutters painted a fresh, dark navy. It was a house paid for by miles. Caleb unlocked the front door quietly, not wanting to startle anyone. The warmth of the house hit him, smelling of lavender and expensive cleaning products. "Hello?" His voice croaked, rough from disuse. Silence answered him. He walked into the living room. The television was on, muted. Meredith was sitting on the beige sectional, her legs tucked under her, tapping furiously on her phone. She didn't look up immediately. "I'm home," Caleb said, louder this time. Meredith jumped, her hands snapping the phone face down on the cushion. She smoothed her hair. She was wearing a silk blouse he had never seen before, and her makeup was done perfectly, too perfectly for a Tuesday evening at home. "Oh," she said, her smile tight, not reaching her eyes. "You're back early. The schedule said Thursday." "Made good time," Caleb said, dropping his bag. He waited for a hug, a kiss, a movement. She stayed seated. "Where are the kids?" "Upstairs, doing homework. They're focused, Caleb. Don't go disrupting them right now." Caleb frowned. "Disrupting them? I haven't seen them in 2 weeks, Mer." "And whose fault is that?" she shot back. The tone was casual, practiced, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You chose the long-haul routes. To pay for the roof," he said, gesturing around. "To pay for the braces, the car." Meredith stood up, brushing invisible lint from her slacks. "I have to head out. PTA meeting." "Now? I just walked in the door." "Life doesn't stop just because you decide to park your truck, Caleb." She grabbed her purse and keys. As she brushed past him, he caught a scent. It wasn't the lavender of the house. It was a heavy, musky perfume, mixed with the faint, stale odor of tobacco smoke. Meredith didn't smoke. Caleb stood alone in the living room. He walked to the stairs and looked up. "Leo? Sarah?" A door creaked open. Leo, 10 years old and already growing tall, stepped into the hallway. He didn't run down the stairs. He stood by the banister, gripping it with white knuckles. Sarah peeked out from behind him. "Hey guys," Caleb said, forcing a smile, his heart sinking. "Daddy's home." Leo didn't smile. He looked at his father with a strange mixture of confusion and guardedness. "Mom said you weren't coming back until you made enough money," the boy said. Caleb froze. "What?" "She said you liked the road better than us," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Caleb said, taking a step up. "No, that's not true. I work so we can—" "Don't," Leo snapped, stepping back. It was a flinch, a genuine flinch, as if Caleb were a threat. Caleb stopped dead on the third step. The silence returned, heavier than before. He looked at his hands, calloused, stained with grease despite the scrubbing, and then at his children, who looked at him like he was a monster they had been warned about in a bedtime story. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where an argument had just ended, even though one hadn't really begun. Meredith had returned from her PTA meeting just after 10 o'clock, smelling of mints and cool night air. She offered no details about the meeting, and Caleb, exhausted from the 14-hour drive, hadn't pressed. He stood in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only company he had. He was hungry, a deep, hollow ache that had nothing to do with food, but he settled for cleaning up. As he opened the recycling bin under the sink to toss an empty milk jug, something clinked. Caleb paused. He reached in and pulled out a wine bottle. It was heavy, dark glass with a cream label, a frantic, expensive Cabernet that retailed for at least $80. Caleb frowned. He drank Budweiser. Meredith usually stuck to the $10 Pinot Grigio they bought in bulk at Costco. Celebration? He muttered to himself, turning the bottle over in his hands. It was empty. He walked into the living room where Meredith was folding laundry, or rather, aggressively snapping towels into squares. "Hey, Mer," he asked, keeping his voice light. "When did we start drinking the top shelf stuff? Found this in the bin." Meredith didn't look up. Her hands didn't stop moving. "Oh, that. It was a gift from a client at the firm. We cracked it open for book club on Tuesday." "Book club?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "I thought book club was next week." "It got moved, Caleb. Schedules change. You'd know that if you were here." The jab was quick, precise, and effective. It shut him up. He placed the bottle on the counter, feeling foolish for asking. But as he looked at her, he noticed her phone sitting on the pile of folded towels. It buzzed, a short, sharp vibration. Meredith's hand shot out like a viper, flipping the screen over before the notification could fully light up the room. "Work?" he asked. "Spam," she said. "Just spam." Later that night, Caleb lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows. The space between them on the king-sized mattress felt like a canyon. Meredith was turned away from him, her breathing steady, but he knew she wasn't asleep. He could feel the tension radiating off her back. He woke early before the sun, driven by a habit formed on the road. He decided to take the family SUV to get bagels, a peace offering for the kids. Maybe breakfast would fix the weird energy from yesterday. He walked into the cool garage. The Lexus SUV sat there shining under the fluorescent lights. He opened the driver's side door and froze. The seat was pushed back, way back. Meredith was 5'4", Caleb was 6'1", and even he didn't need the seat back this far. Someone with significantly longer legs had been driving this car. He sat in the seat, his feet barely touching the pedals. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He looked at the center console. In the cup holder, there was a faint ring of condensation, dried now, and a crumpled receipt jammed into the corner. Caleb smoothed it out. It was from a gas station near the interstate, dated 3 days ago at 11:30 p.m. It wasn't for gas. It was for 2 coffees and a pack of mints. Meredith was supposed to be asleep at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she didn't drink coffee at night. He gripped the steering wheel, the leather cold against his palms. The silence of the garage suddenly felt loud, screaming a truth he wasn't ready to hear. He wasn't just losing his wife to indifference. He was losing her to someone else. And the worst part was the realization that she hadn't just taken the car, she had taken his place. Caleb stood in the hallway, the brown paper bag from the bakery crinkling softly in his grip. The smell of warm cinnamon raisin bagels and coffee should have been a comfort, a sensory promise of a normal Saturday morning. But the air in the house was thin, carrying the low, murmuring tone of a conversation taking place in the kitchen. He had meant to walk right in, to announce breakfast is served, with the false cheerfulness he had been practicing in the rearview mirror of the truck. But the sound of his own name froze his boots on the hardwood floor. "I know, honey," Meredith's voice floated out. It was soft, dripping with a performative sympathy that made Caleb's stomach turn. "I know you wanted him there for the science fair. I sent him the date 3 times. Did he text back?" It was Leo. His voice sounded small, stripped of the 10-year-old bravado he usually carried. He, he was busy, Leo, Meredith sighed. It was a sigh that carried the weight of a martyr. You have to understand, Daddy loves his job. He loves being out on the road, the open space, the freedom. It's hard for him to be here, stuck in a house with all of us and our needs. Caleb's grip on the bag tightened until his knuckles turned white. Busy? He had been driving through a blizzard in North Dakota, hauling timber to pay for Leo's private math tutor. He hadn't received a text about the science fair. Not one. Does he hate us? Sarah asked. She was 7. She shouldn't be asking questions like that. No, baby, no, Meredith cooed, but the reassurance was laced with arsenic. He doesn't hate you. He chooses himself. Some men are just built that way. They need the money for their own things. You see the truck, right? How much time he spends polishing it? That's his priority. We just have to be strong for each other. Caleb felt a physical blow to his chest, harder than any shifting load he'd ever felt in the cab. She wasn't just cheating on him, she was erasing him. She was taking his sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the back pain, the loneliness, and twisting it into a weapon to sever the bond with his children. He couldn't stand there anymore. He couldn't listen to his life being rewritten. Caleb stepped into the kitchen archway. Good morning. The reaction was instantaneous. The intimacy at the kitchen island shattered. Meredith straightened up, her face shifting from conspiratorial mother to cold roommate in a split second. Leo and Sarah looked down at their bowls of oatmeal, shoulders hunching as if anticipating a blow. You're back, Meredith said, reaching for her coffee mug. Her hand was steady, too steady. Got bagels, Caleb said, placing the bag on the counter. The cheerfulness he had rehearsed was gone, replaced by a flat, wounded timber. Cinnamon raisin for you, Leo. Plain for Sarah. Leo didn't look up. He pushed his spoon around the bowl, creating gray swirls in the oats. I'm not hungry. It's your favorite. Bud, Caleb pressed gently, trying to catch his son's eye. I said I'm not hungry, Leo snapped, pushing the bowl away. The ceramic clattered loudly against the granite. He looked at Caleb then, and the look wasn't fear anymore. It was resentment. Why did you come back if you don't want to be here? Leo! Caleb stepped forward, shocked. Go to your room, Leo, Meredith interjected smoothly, standing between them. She didn't look at Leo. She looked at Caleb, her eyes daring him to escalate it. You're upsetting him, Caleb. You've been home less than 24 hours and look at the tension. I didn't do anything, Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. I just bought bagels. It's your energy, Meredith said, turning her back to him to clear the dishes. You bring the stress of the road in here. Just give them space. Don't force it. Caleb stood alone by the island as his children retreated upstairs, the bagels growing cold in the bag. He looked at Meredith's back, at the rigid line of her shoulders. She was winning. She was stealing them right in front of his face, and she was using his own love to do it. The house settled into a restless quiet around midnight. Meredith had announced she was taking a long bath, a ritual involving locked doors and scented candles that she had adopted recently. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He felt like an intruder in his own bedroom. The pillows were arranged in a way he didn't recognize, and the bedside table was cluttered with books he didn't know she was reading. On the duvet, glowing softly against the dark navy thread count, lay the family iPad. It was usually Leo's, but Meredith had been using it to look up recipes earlier. She had forgotten to take it with her. Caleb stared at it. The screen was dark, but a notification blinked, a silent pulse of light. Message from Greg. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm. He reached out, his calloused fingers hovering over the glass. He shouldn't. A man shouldn't spy on his wife. It was a breach of trust, a line you couldn't uncross. But then he remembered the look in Leo's eyes that morning. Why did you come back? He tapped the screen. The passcode. He tried Meredith's birthday. Incorrect. He tried their anniversary. Incorrect. He paused, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He typed in 0000. It unlocked. It was the default setting she hadn't bothered to change for the common device. The iMessage app was open. The thread wasn't just a few flirtatious texts. It was a novel, a scrolling, endless transcript of a life lived without him. Greg wasn't just a friend. The photos confirmed that instantly. Selfies taken in Caleb's own kitchen while he was in Nebraska. Meredith wearing a robe he had bought her. Greg's arm possessed over her shoulder. But it was the text that made Caleb's blood run cold. It wasn't the romance, it was the logistics. Greg, when does the ATM come back? Dated 2 days ago. Meredith, Thursday. Ugh, I have to play the dutiful wife for a week. But don't worry, I think I can guilt him into picking up the extra run to Alaska next month. He feels bad about missing the science fair. Greg, good. We need that haul to put the deposit down on the condo. Keep him feeling guilty. It's easier that way. Meredith, I'm working on the kids. Leo is already firmly on our side. He thinks Caleb is choosing the truck over him. It's almost too easy. Caleb dropped the iPad onto the bed as if it were burning hot. The breath left his lungs in a sharp, ragged gasp. It wasn't just an affair. It was an extraction. They were mining him. Meredith wasn't just seeking comfort in another man's arms. She was strategically dismantling Caleb's relationship with his children to keep him on the road, earning the money that she and Greg were planning to spend. He stood up, his legs shaking violently. He walked to the mirror on the dresser and looked at himself. He saw the gray in his beard, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, the cheap flannel shirt. He looked like a fool, a useful, hard-working fool. The bathroom door clicked open down the hall. Steam billowed out, carrying the scent of eucalyptus. "Caleb?" Meredith's voice called out, casual and light. "Did you turn down the thermostat? It's freezing in here." Caleb looked back at the iPad, then at the door. The rage that filled him wasn't the hot, explosive kind. It was cold. It was the temperature of the steel he hauled through the winter nights. He picked up the iPad, took a photo of the screen with his own phone, and then placed the tablet back exactly where it had been. He knew now, and knowledge was the only weapon he had left. Sunday morning sunlight flooded the living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A serene backdrop for a demolition. Caleb hadn't slept. He had sat in the kitchen chair all night. The image of those texts burned into his mind. When Meredith finally came downstairs in her silk robe, expecting coffee, she found Caleb standing by the fireplace, holding his phone. "We need to talk," Caleb said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder before the storm. Meredith paused, tightening the sash of her robe. "Can it wait? I promised Sarah pancakes." "No, it can't wait." Caleb held up the phone. "Who is Greg? And why does he think I'm an ATM?" Meredith's face didn't crumble. It hardened. She walked past him to the kitchen island, pouring a glass of water. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're being paranoid again. It's the isolation on the road, Caleb. It makes you crazy." "I saw the messages, Meredith." Caleb's voice rose, cracking with the strain. "I saw them on the iPad. You're planning to use my Alaska run to buy a condo with him. You're telling him to keep me guilty so I keep driving." Meredith slammed the glass down. "You went through my private messages. You violated my privacy. You violated this marriage," Caleb shouted. The restraint he had held on to for years snapped. "I work 80 hours a week for this family. I bleed for this house. And you're laughing at me with some real estate agent?" "He listens to me," Meredith screamed back, her voice shrill, carrying up the stairs. "He is here. You are a ghost, Caleb. You're just a paycheck that visits once a month to complain about the electricity bill. I'm doing it for you." "You're doing it because you can't handle being a real father," Meredith countered, tears instantly springing to her eyes. A weaponized display of emotion. "You run away to your truck because you don't know how to love us. That is a lie." Caleb stepped forward, desperate to make her stop, to make her hear the truth. "Get away from her." The scream came from the hallway. Caleb spun around. Leo was standing there, his face red, tears streaming down his cheeks. Sarah was behind him, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with terror. "Leo," Caleb pleaded, his hands shaking. "Son, you don't understand. Mom is—" "Don't touch her!" Leo charged forward, placing his small body between Caleb and Meredith. He pushed against Caleb's stomach with both hands. It was a weak shove, physically, but it hit Caleb with the force of a freight train. You're hurting her. You always hurt her. I'm not hurting her, Leo. She's lying to you. You're the liar, Leo screamed, his voice breaking. Mom told us. She told us you yell at her. She told us you hate being here. Just go. Go back to your truck. We don't want you here. Caleb looked up at Meredith. She was standing behind Leo, her hands resting protectively on the boy's shoulders. She wasn't crying anymore. Over the top of their son's head, she looked at Caleb with a cold, triumphant stare. She had built a human shield out of their children. See? Meredith whispered, loud enough for Caleb to hear, but soft enough to sound like a victim to the kids. He's scaring us, Leo. He's unstable. Go away, Sarah cried out from the stairs, echoing her brother. Caleb stood paralyzed. The evidence on his phone meant nothing. The receipts, the dates, the truth. It was all ash. In the court of his own home, the verdict had already been delivered, and the jury was his own flesh and blood. He looked at Leo's hateful eyes that used to look at him like he was Superman, and felt something inside him break permanently. The silence that followed the screaming was worse than the noise. Caleb had backed out of the living room, his hands raised in surrender, not to Meredith, but to the 10-year-old boy standing with clenched fists and tear-stained cheeks. He had seen the terror in Sarah's eyes, a terror directed at him. He sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, the door closed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, gray numbness. Downstairs, he could hear the faint murmur of the television. Meredith had turned on cartoons. She was soothing them with sugar and distraction, cementing the bond he had just broken. Caleb looked around the room. The navy blue walls, the expensive drapes, the oak dresser, it was all material. None of it held his spirit. He realized with a devastating clarity that he wasn't fighting for his marriage anymore. That corpse had been cold for a long time. He was fighting for his children's souls. But as long as he was in this house, Meredith would use them as ammunition. Every argument, every defense he mounted, she would twist into an attack on their peace. To save them, he had to leave them. He stood up and grabbed his duffel bag. He didn't pack his clothes from the closet or the toiletries from the bathroom counter. He only packed what he had brought in from the truck. 3 work shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, his heavy boots, and his shaving kit. He left the watch Meredith had given him for their 10th anniversary on the nightstand. He walked over to the dresser where a framed photo sat, a picture from a camping trip 4 years ago, before the long-haul runs started, before the private school tuition became the priority. Leo was on his shoulders. Sarah was holding a s'more. They looked happy. He took the photo out of the frame, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his wallet behind his CDL license. He didn't write a note. Meredith would just burn it or read it to the kids with a mocking tone. Caleb opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. He walked down the stairs, his heavy boots making no sound on the carpet runners. He paused at the bottom. Through the archway, he saw the back of Leo's head on the couch. Meredith was sitting next to him, stroking his hair, whispering something that made Leo nod. Caleb wanted to scream. He wanted to run in there and shake the truth into them, but he knew it would only leave bruises. He turned to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the blinding Sunday afternoon sun. The air smelled of cut grass and gasoline. He walked to his pickup truck, threw the bag in the passenger seat, and climbed in. As he turned the key in the ignition, he looked back at the house one last time. The curtain in the living room window moved slightly. Meredith was watching. She didn't look relieved. She looked satisfied. She had won the territory. Caleb shifted the truck into reverse. He didn't look back as he drove out of the subdivision, past the manicured lawns and the slow children at play signs. He turned onto the main road and headed toward the interstate. He picked up his phone and dialed the dispatch manager. "Yeah, this is Miller," Caleb said, his voice flat, dead. "That Alaska run, the ice road contract, is it still open?" A pause on the other end. "It's open, Caleb, but that's a 6-month rotation. You sure? It's brutal up there." "I'll take it," Caleb said, merging onto the highway. "I'm available immediately. Just get me out of here." The thermometer on the dashboard read 42 degrees below zero. At that temperature, steel becomes brittle, rubber snaps like glass, and mistakes are fatal. Caleb shifted gears, guiding the massive 18-wheeler up the slick incline of Adigan Pass. Outside the cab, the world was a void of white and gray, the headlights cutting a tunnel through the swirling snow of the Dalton Highway. It had been 6 months since he walked out of the house in Ohio, 6 months of perpetual twilight and isolation. He had become exactly what Meredith had accused him of being, a ghost. He lived in the sleeper cab of his truck, a 5x8 box that smelled of diesel and stale coffee. He didn't rent an apartment in Anchorage. He didn't go to bars. He drove. He took the runs no one else wanted, the high-risk loads to the oil fields in Prudhoe Bay, because the hazard pay was astronomical. Every 2 weeks, he stopped at a post office in Fairbanks. He bought a cashier's check for $4,000. He put it in an envelope addressed to Meredith Miller. No note, no return address, no "I love you" or "I miss you," just the money. The silence was his shield, and the money was his proof. A paper trail that he hoped one day would speak louder than Meredith's lies. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was the only tether he had left to the lower 48. He glanced at the screen. A text from Meredith. "Leo failed math. The tutor is expensive. We need more than the check covers this month. Also, he asked why you didn't call on his birthday. I told him you were probably out of range. Don't make me a liar, Caleb." Caleb's jaw tightened. He hadn't called on Leo's birthday because the last time he called, Meredith had put the phone on speaker and sighed loudly every time he tried to speak, orchestrating the awkwardness until Leo asked to hang up. He felt the familiar burn of anger, the urge to type back, "I sent a gift. I sent a card. You hid them." But he didn't. He knew the game now. Any response gave her ammunition. If he fought, he was aggressive. If he explained, he was making excuses. The only move was not to play. He reached over and pressed the power button, plunging the cab into electronic silence. The truck groaned as it crested the pass, the engine roaring against the wind. Below him, the valley stretched out, dark and treacherous. He wasn't abandoning them. He repeated this mantra like a prayer. He was building a foundation they couldn't see yet. He was banking every cent that didn't go to the mortgage or the needs Meredith fabricated. He was creating a safety net for the day the bottom fell out of her lies. A sudden gust of wind slammed into the trailer, threatening to jackknife the rig. Caleb wrestled the steering wheel, his muscles straining, his focus narrowing to the patch of ice directly in front of his tires. His heart rate spiked, not from fear, but from a cold, hard clarity. Let Meredith play house with Greg. Let them spend the monthly checks on dinners and appearances. Caleb was out here in the dark, fighting the ice, keeping the world turning for them. He was the invisible man, the villain in their story, but he would survive this. He would survive the cold, the loneliness, and the silence, because winter doesn't last forever. 2 years is a long time to hold your breath. For Meredith, it felt like she had been inhaling slowly, waiting for the moment of perfect satisfaction that never quite arrived. The colonial house in Whispering Pines still looked impressive from the curb, but inside the edges were starting to curl. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind of damp Ohio evening that seeped into the drywall. In the kitchen, the dishwasher was making a grinding noise, a mechanical death rattle that had been getting louder for weeks. Meredith stood at the island, staring at a stack of envelopes. The electricity bill was overdue. The property tax assessment had gone up, and right on top sat the plain, white envelope with the Fairbanks, Alaska postmark. Did the check come? Greg walked into the kitchen. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, one Meredith had bought him for Christmas, and holding a glass of scotch. He looked the part of the suburban stepfather, handsome, relaxed, available. But he was too available. His consulting business seemed to involve a lot of afternoons on the golf course and very few invoices. It came, Meredith said, not looking up. She ripped the envelope open. The cashier's check was there, steady and reliable as the tides. $4,000. Great, Greg said, reaching for the check. I was thinking we could finally book that trip to Cabo. The kids need a break. I need a break. Meredith pulled the check back, her fingers gripping the paper tight. This isn't for Cabo, Greg. The roof is leaking in the guest room. The dishwasher sounds like it's exploding. And Leo needs braces. Greg's smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. like a child told he couldn't have dessert. Babe, don't be a buzzkill. You can get the roof patched. And Leo's teeth are fine. You worry too much. I worry because someone has to pay for this life, Meredith snapped. The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Greg took a sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing. Well, if you need more cash, just text him. Tell him the cost of living went up. He's up there sitting on a pile of cash, right? He owes you. You're the one raising his kids. Meredith looked at Greg, really looked at him. She saw the softness of his hands, hands that had never changed a tire or fixed a furnace. She remembered how Caleb used to fix things before they even broke. If the dishwasher made a noise, Caleb would have been on the floor with a toolbox within 5 minutes, grumbling but competent. Greg just turned up the volume on the TV. He sends enough, Meredith said quietly. We're just spending too much. I'm not the one with the private Pilates lessons, Greg shot back, his charm dissolving into petulance. Look, if you're going to be in a mood, I'm going to head to the club. I have a meeting. At 8 o'clock at night? Business, Meredith. Someone has to network. He grabbed his keys and the bottle of scotch, leaving the glass on the counter without a coaster. The back door slammed, leaving Meredith alone with the grinding dishwasher. She walked to the window and watched Greg's leased Audi speed out of the driveway. A bitter taste rose in her throat. She had destroyed her marriage because she wanted someone who was present, someone who understood her. Now she had a man who was physically present but utterly useless, a decoration that cost too much to maintain. Upstairs, she heard Leo shouting at a video game. Sarah was silent in her room. The house felt hollow. Meredith looked down at the check from Alaska, the only thing in her life that hadn't let her down in 2 years. She felt a crack forming in the story she told herself, a terrifying realization that she hadn't upgraded her life. She had merely hollowed it out. 4 years can turn a boy into a stranger. At 14, Leo was taller than his mother, lanky and sullen, with a permanent scowl etched into his features. He wore headphones like armor, blocking out the sound of Greg's loud phone calls and his mother's nervous laughter. It was a Saturday, and the house was stiflingly hot. The air conditioning unit had seized up 2 days ago. Another thing Greg promised to have a guy look at, but hadn't. Meredith had sent Leo into the attic to find a portable fan stored somewhere in the eaves. The attic smelled of dry wood, fiberglass insulation, and trapped heat. Leo crawled over the wooden beams, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. He found the fan, a dusty plastic box in the corner, but as he dragged it out, his elbow knocked over a stack of plastic totes. One of the totes didn't have a lid. It tipped over, spilling its contents across the pink insulation. Leo sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. He reached out to shove the mess back in. It looked like boring paperwork. Old tax returns, receipts, manila envelopes. He grabbed a handful of papers to stuff them back, but a flash of color caught his eye. It was a bright orange envelope, the kind you buy in the greeting card aisle for $5. Leo froze. He shined the flashlight directly on it. In handwriting that was blocky, precise, and achingly familiar, it read, "To Leo, happy 13th birthday." Leo felt a strange buzzing in his ears. His 13th birthday had been last year. He remembered it vividly. Greg had bought him a video game he already owned, and Meredith had made a speech about how, "We don't need anyone else." She had told him specifically that his father hadn't called or sent anything. "He forgets, Leo. It's not your fault." His hands trembling, Leo tore open the orange envelope. A Hallmark card fell out, a picture of a dirt bike on the front. Inside, a check for $500 fluttered to the insulation. "Leo, I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Keep your grades up. I'm working on a plan to come back. Don't let the world make you hard. Love, Dad." Leo sat back on his heels, the fiberglass itching his skin, but he didn't feel it. He dug deeper into the pile. There were more. Dozens of them. A card for Sarah's 10th birthday, a letter dated 3 Christmases ago, a thick envelope labeled, "College Fund Statements Do Not Open." He opened the college fund envelope. It was a bank statement for a custodial account in his name. The balance was 0. A withdrawal history showed a series of transfers to an account named GM Realty LLC, Greg's shell company. The air in the attic seemed to vanish. Leo couldn't breathe. For 4 years, he had hated his father. He had deleted the few voicemails Caleb had managed to leave before changing his number. He had thrown away the memory of the man who taught him to ride a bike, replacing it with the monster his mother described. But the monster didn't send birthday cards. The monster didn't save for college. The monster was downstairs drinking a beer in the living room, while the thief was in the kitchen making lunch. Leo looked at the pile of stolen words and stolen money. A rage, different from the teenage angst he usually carried, ignited in his chest. This wasn't just lying. This was theft. They had stolen his father from him. He carefully gathered the letters, the cards, and the damning bank statements. He didn't put them back in the tote. He shoved them under his t-shirt against his sweating skin. He grabbed the fan with his free hand and crawled back toward the attic hatch. He wouldn't scream. Not yet. He had learned from the best liars in the world, after all. He would wait. He would read every single word his father had written, and then he would burn this house to the ground with the truth. The rumble was different this time. It wasn't the sputtering cough of the old Ford pickup, nor the groaning diesel of a company semi. It was the deep, authoritative growl of a brand-new, heavy-duty GMC Sierra pulling into the driveway. The chrome grille gleamed under the October sun, a stark contrast to the peeling paint on the garage door it faced. Meredith was standing on the front lawn, arguing with a landscaping contractor who was pointing aggressively at an overgrown oak tree. She looked up, shielding her eyes against the glare. When she saw the truck, her hand dropped. She didn't recognize the vehicle, but she recognized the man who stepped out of it. Caleb hit the ground with a solid thud of his boots. He had changed. The 4 years on the Dalton Highway had stripped away the soft, apologetic layer of the suburban father. He was leaner, the gray in his beard now deliberate and trimmed close. His skin was weathered by wind and ice, giving him the look of something carved from granite. He wore a heavy Carhartt jacket that fit him perfectly, not the baggy grease-stained clothes she remembered. He didn't look tired. He looked dangerous in his calmness. Meredith walked toward him, her heels sinking into the soft, uncut grass. Greg appeared at the front door, holding a beer. Though it was only 2 in the afternoon, he stayed on the porch, leaning against the railing like a spectator. "Caleb?" Meredith's voice was a mix of confusion and instinctual defensiveness. "You didn't say you were coming. It's not your weekend." Caleb closed the truck door. He didn't lock it. He walked around the front of the vehicle, his eyes sweeping over the property. He saw the missing shingle on the roof. He saw the rusted gutter hanging loose on the east side. He saw the "for sale" sign on the neighbor's lawn and wondered if this house would be next. "I'm not here for a weekend, Meredith," Caleb said. His voice was deeper, resonating in the quiet cul-de-sac. "I'm done driving." Meredith laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Done? You can't be done. We have bills, Caleb. Leo's tuition, the car payments. You can't just quit." "I didn't quit," Caleb said, stopping 3 feet from her. He towered over her, not with menace, but with presence. "I finished my contract. I started my own logistics company in Fairbanks. I run the fleet now. I don't drive the trucks." Greg stepped off the porch, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "So what? You think you can just waltz back here and play dad? It's been 4 years, buddy. They don't even know you." Caleb shifted his gaze to Greg. He looked at the man's soft midsection, the expensive loafers, the beer bottle. He looked at him with the indifference one might show a buzzing fly. "They know the version of me you sold them," Caleb said calmly. "But products have expiration dates, and yours just ran out." He reached into his jacket pocket. Meredith flinched, expecting a weapon or a lawsuit. Instead, Caleb pulled out a set of keys. Not to this house, he knew she had changed the locks years ago, but to the rental property 3 streets over. A nice house. A clean house. "I'm staying," Caleb said. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you I'm back in town, and I'm going to see my children. Not on your schedule, on the court schedule. My lawyer filed the petition this morning. Since I'm no longer absent due to work, your sole custody argument is dead." Meredith's face went pale. "You can't do that. Leo hates you. Sarah's afraid of you. You'll just hurt them." "If they hate me," Caleb said, his eyes locking onto hers, hard and unforgiving, "I want to hear it from them, not from you." He walked past her, up the walkway he had paid for, toward the front door, where Greg stood blocking the path. Caleb didn't stop. He didn't slow down. Greg, realizing the physics of the situation, stepped aside at the last second. Caleb raised his hand and knocked on the door of his own house. It was a heavy, confident sound, the sound of a man who had survived the ice and had come home to melt the frost. The knock on the door reverberated through the house like a gavel strike. Meredith scrambled past Greg, rushing into the foyer, her face flushed with a mixture of panic and rage. She positioned herself at the bottom of the stairs, her arms spread wide as if she were guarding a vault. "Don't come down," she shouted up the stairwell, her voice shrill. "Leo, Sarah, lock your doors. I'm calling the police." The front door opened. Caleb didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into the foyer, bringing the crisp autumn air in with him. He looked at Meredith, then at the staircase behind her. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just stood there, a solid, immovable fact. "I'm not leaving until I see them, Meredith," Caleb said quietly. "You're trespassing," Meredith hissed. "Greg, call 911. He's threatening us." Greg fumbled with his phone, his eyes darting between Caleb's broad shoulders and the door, clearly calculating the odds of a physical altercation he wanted no part of. "Mom, stop." The voice came from the top of the stairs. It wasn't the high-pitched voice of a child anymore. It was the cracking baritone of a teenager. Leo stood on the landing, wearing a faded hoodie. Sarah stood behind him, peering over the banister, her eyes wide and confused. "Leo, go back to your room!" Meredith screamed, her composure fracturing. "He's dangerous. He's here to hurt us." Leo didn't move. He walked slowly down the stairs, step by step. In his hand, he clutched a sheaf of papers, bright orange envelopes, crumpled letters, and bank statements. "He's not dangerous," Leo said, his voice shaking, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of truth. "And he didn't forget." Meredith froze. Her eyes dropped to the papers in Leo's hand. She recognized the orange envelope instantly. "Where did you get those?" she whispered. "The attic," Leo said, reaching the bottom step. He stood toe-to-toe with his mother, but he was looking past her, straight at Caleb. "You hid them. For years. You told us he didn't care. You told us he was selfish." Leo held up a bank statement. "You told us he didn't send money, but he did. And you gave it to Greg." Greg took a step back, raising his hands. "Now hold on, kid. That was an investment." "Shut up," Leo snapped, turning on Greg with a ferocity that made the man flinch. "You stole from my college fund. You stole my birthday cards." Leo turned back to Caleb, the anger drained out of the boy's face, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He looked at his father, really looked at him, for the first time in 4 years. He saw the lines around Caleb's eyes, the gray hair, the rough hands that hung at his sides. He saw the toll the road had taken. "You wrote to me," Leo said, his voice breaking. "You wrote that you were proud of me." Caleb felt a lump form in his throat, painful and sharp. He took a hesitant step forward. "Every month, Leo. I never stopped." Meredith grabbed Leo's arm. "Leo, listen to me. He abandoned us. He chose the truck." "I did what I had to do to survive." Leo looked down at his mother's hand on his arm. He didn't shove her away. He just gently peeled her fingers off his sleeve. The gesture was far more devastating than a push. It was a dismissal. "You didn't do it to survive, Mom," Leo said softly. "You did it because you wanted to be the victim. But you're not." Leo walked past her. He crossed the few feet of hardwood floor that separated him from his father. He stopped, looking up at the man who had vanished into the ice to save them. "Hi, Dad," Leo whispered. Caleb fell to his knees. It wasn't a collapse of weakness, but an act of leveling the ground. He wrapped his arms around his son, burying his face in the rough cotton of the hoodie. He felt Leo's arms come around his shoulders, holding on tight, a desperate embrace 4 years in the making. From the top of the stairs, Sarah ran down, dodging her mother's outstretched hand, and crashed into them. The three of them formed a knot on the floor of the foyer, a fortress of reunited blood, while Meredith stood alone against the wall, watching her carefully constructed world turn to dust. The foyer was quiet, but it was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets. It was the breathless quiet of a storm having finally broken. Caleb stood up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at Leo and Sarah, who were standing close to him, their body language clear. They had crossed the line, and they weren't going back. "Get your shoes," Caleb said softly, "and your coats. We're going to get dinner. Real food." "You can't take them," Meredith whispered. She was leaning against the wall, her face pale, the fight draining out of her. "This is kidnapping." "It's parenting," Caleb corrected her. He didn't look at her with anger anymore. He looked at her with pity. "And since you spent the last 4 years telling them I abandoned them, I think a few hours of catching up is overdue." Greg, sensing the absolute collapse of the situation, cleared his throat. He had edged his way toward the living room, keys in hand. "Look, Meredith, this is heavy. I think I'm going to head out. Let things cool down." Meredith spun on him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're leaving? Now? After everything?" "I didn't sign up for a custody war, babe," Greg said, his charm completely evaporated, revealing the weak, selfish man beneath. "And I definitely didn't sign up for grand larceny investigations regarding college funds." "You're on your own with this one." The door clicked shut behind him. The sound was final. Meredith looked at the closed door, then at her children, who were tying their shoes, ignoring her. She had traded a man who would drive through hell for her, for a man who wouldn't stay through an argument. Caleb opened the front door. "We'll be back," he said to Meredith, "to get their things. I'll have my lawyer call you about the visitation schedule." And Meredith, she looked up, tears finally spilling over. Tears of genuine loss this time. "Don't wait up." 3 months later, the rental house 3 streets over wasn't as big as the Colonial. The kitchen counters were laminate, not granite, and the garage only fit 1 car. But the house was warm. Caleb stood at the stove, stirring a pot of chili. The smell of cumin and onions filled the air. In the living room, Leo was explaining a physics problem to Sarah. They were laughing. It was a sound Caleb hadn't heard in years, a genuine, unguarded laugh. He walked over to the dining table and set the pot down. Leo looked up. The anger that had defined his face for so long was gone, replaced by the awkward, growing confidence of a teenager who knew he had a safety net. "Dad," Leo said, tapping his pencil on his notebook. "Mom called again. She wants to know if I'm coming for Thanksgiving." Caleb sat down. He didn't tell Leo what to do. He didn't badmouth Meredith. He had promised himself he would never use the tactics she had used. "It's up to you, Leo," Caleb said. "She's your mother. That doesn't change. But you decide where you want to be." Leo looked at Sarah, then back at Caleb. He looked around the small, warm room. There were no secrets here. No hidden letters in the attic. No whispered lies in the kitchen. "I think we'll go for lunch," Leo said eventually. "But we're having dinner here. You make better chili." Caleb smiled. It was a small victory, quiet and unassuming. He had lost years of time, and those scars would never fully heal. But as he looked at his children, safe and whole under his roof, he knew the long haul was finally over. He had driven through the ice and the dark to get back to them, and this time he was parked for good. The truth had won, and the silence was finally, beautifully broken.